This video is about the steamship America, a steam package freighter which made 3 weekly runs to Duluth, Minnesota, stopping at Isle Royale, Michigan, and many other locations along the north shore of Lake Superior. The America was built in Wyandotte, Michigan in 1898 and worked in 2 other locations before coming to Lake Superior on April of 2002. The ship went down when it hit a shoal shortly after leaving the dock of Washington Harbor, which is part of the island of Isle Royale. The accident happened at 3 a.m. on June 7, 1928. These images are a familiar sight as the America steamed into ports along the north shore of Lake Superior, delivering passengers and goods to villages. At many of the stops, fresh fish was brought on board for the return trip to Duluth. Studying these images will help you understand what we are looking at when we are diving. This is a model of the wreck as it sits today. It sits at a 45-degree angle from stern to bow and lifts at a 30-degree angle to port, or left side of the ship. The model shows the lower steel part of the hull cut away so that the compartment below deck can be seen, but this part of the ship is still fully intact. Here is the boiler room area, and behind is the engine room. In the movie, we swim in and out of this area a lot. It's where the Great Lakes Preservation Society rehung pipe that was hanging down when we first see it in the movie. At some time in the spring of 2011, the top section, everything above the red line, was sheared off by ice or some type of a storm. Don Matashek shot this video with a Super 8 movie camera housed in a PVC pipe with clear plastic ends years ago. It was transferred to VHS, but some of the quality is gone as it is hard to preserve film. Notice the American flag, and we're also looking at condensate pump that fed the boiler. The Great Lakes Preservation Society did extensive work on the America in the late 1990s and into the next decade. Some of the shots in this movie are of work they did in the 4th year of a 10-year program. The pipe that are rehung are what I was talking about earlier when we was looking at the model. A channel iron and cable is to hold up structure from falling to port. I'm sure that this helped to hold the ship together in 2011 when the top part of the ship was ripped off. Here they're tightening up the cable, trying to pull the structure back up away from falling off the port side. Planks that are lag bolt to the top of the structure so they could pull it. Here you can see the cables that go back to that channel iron that you saw earlier bolted to the big I-beam. Here is part of the Model T that was being shipped when the ship went down. Some of the deck of the Model T had come off and floated away. Great Lakes Preservation Society reassembled as much of the deck as they could find. Much of the Model T has been stolen over the years. I can still remember when the rims were still on the front of the Model T. Here you see them putting the screws in the deck, trying to hold the boards down while they're putting the deck back together. All of this work really made a large difference on how well it looks today. This is of bunks that they screwed all back together. His bunks were all laying kind of all over. Also, they vacuumed a lot of the debris out of especially the front area, so it didn't get stirred up when people dove. Here we have the grand staircase. The Great Lakes Preservation Society screwed a lot of this back together and tried to straighten it up as well as possible. Later in the film you'll see where a lot of it's falling to the port side again because of the weight on it. This video, taken by Bob Kursky in 2012 of the Model T, shows the bed was still intact and maybe a better look at the engine and firewall. You see the top of the engine better and the firewall, steering column, and you can kind of see the frame, but everything is green and it has algae growing under water. There's a hole in the fire in the flatbed. I think that probably was intact when the Great Lakes Preservation Society got done. Todd Ross took this video in 2002 of the top deck that was sheared off on 2011. Pay special attention to the domer. It shows up in two places on the bottom after the storm. The corrugated pipe that you see in a few places on the ship was a salvage attempt that was done in the 1960s to raise the America and take it back to Duluth in its own power. They felt that if they could dewater the front one-third and the rear one-third of the ship, it would float. Then they would take it to shallower water where they would make repairs. By November, they had the front one-third dewatered and were well underway to dewater the back one-third when a November storm rolled in. Over winter, someone planted an explosive under the ship and it slid further down the bank and lifts the port more than it was. It also bent the propeller shaft, which meant that it would not run under its own power. Isle Royal would not renew the permit. This section is really a lot longer than I would like to see it. I looked for what I could cut, but on the other hand, all of what I see on this section is what was sheared off in the storm. These divots you see scattered all over when the top of the ship is sheared off. There's that dormer again that you see on the bottom in a couple of different places. I believe he's made full circle around the top now, and he's starting to come back to the spot where the front end had gotten sheared off at a different time, long before I started diving. In about 2 years or 2.5 years, the front part of the ship had been sheared off by ice and storms. It had slicked completely below the surface from what you saw in the picture, that last picture of the ship when it was sinking. More corrugated pipe. Just to give people a better understanding of what we're looking at underwater, everything above the red line was taken off in the spring of 2011. It's hard to see across the 31-foot beam of the ship because of 30-degree list. But there were a lot of things to see in the upper deck. Here's video taken after the storm. Part of the upper deck are scattered everywhere. There was always been debris on the port side of the ship from the forward parts of the ship torn off. Now we can see some of the structure we used to love to swim through. It gives me a sad feeling of loss to see something as interesting as the America come apart. There's one of the divots that used to hold up the lifeboats that you used to get to shore at night. Part of the back end of the ship. Here's the domer I had mentioned earlier when Todd Ross was swimming around the upper deck when it was still intact in 2002. Notice how off the bottom the debris is piled. Here's part of the railing. Again, the railing. Closer look again at the upper deck. I think they call it the promenade. A lot of times they used to dance out in the back fin of the ship. Note that the steel hull of the ship is near the bottom of the lake on the port side, and that everything above it is wood. The same portholes are up high on the other side of the ship. Remember that the America is listing 30 degrees to port, exposing a lot more of the right side than the left. Laying 30 degrees to port means that almost all of the wood structure is not supported. This video was taken in 2012. You may notice changes in the debris as time and current has moved things around. Some of the debris has settled in to other debris. Also notice how much further back from the stern the rounded end of the deck is. Lots of debris all the way around now. Remember the domer that we looked at that was on the top deck and then along the side of the ship? It is now way behind the stern of the ship. Debris way back. A lot of things had moved. And about at this point, Bob finally turns around and heads back to the ship. And back over the top of this domer again. At this point he looks up and he sees the very back of the stern of the ship. That domer moved quite a ways. Remember the grand staircase that Great Lakes Preservation Society repaired and straightened up in the 1990s? It just can't stand this test of time. Some of the boards have come off again, and it is more twisted than ever. You almost had to look fast though. Bob wasn't given a second look, and I had to slow this part of it way down so everybody could get a good look. Here is the engine room at the turn of the decade. We was able to get down the steps to the lower part of the engine room where the engine crankshaft, connecting rods, water pumps, generator, and a lot of mechanical equipment was located. Now these walls have collapsed and fallen down into the stairway, blocking off the easiest way to the engine room. So we have to squeeze in between the exhaust manifold and get down to the lower engine room. This is the back of the boiler and one of the steam-driven condensate pumps that feed the boiler. There's a lot more to see down in the engine room, but it's real easy to stir up and it's hard to get video. It's dark down there and the lights make for a lot of backscatter. Note the American flag. Actually, it's not as clear as what it was when Don took video earlier. Here's the companionway in '98 when divers could still get all the way around the back of the ship. Note the portholes to the outside of the ship. They should give you a good idea of what level of the ship we are on. There's a bilge pump on the very back of the ship. This pipe was part of the Great Lakes Preservation Society Restoration Project. They were hanging down, and the Great Lakes Preservation Society gathered them and rehung them so that this area was passable. The starboard or right side of the ship looks like this in 2012. The port side is not safe to passable anymore. When the upper deck went off, so did the top of the companionway. Lights fell down. I'm not sure what that hole is. It's gotten so that in places divers are afraid to move anything for fear that something will come down on them, so they turn around and head back out. There was a glimpse of that corrugated pipe again. That's another section that they were trying to dewater. Bob's probably swimming level here. The ship is laying over that much, that 30-degree list. This is on the starboard side. It'd be the right side, where the actual steel hull meets the wood section. You can see how much of the top of the ship is just hanging on that steel hull that's laying almost flat on the port side. This is what it looks like swimming across the upper part of the ship now. There's debris laying everywhere. and it's almost flat. Except for some studs sticking up. This is a clip from a dive that Corey Monahan and Denny Javens took back to the freezers down on the very back bottom of the ship near the propeller. It's I think is mostly a food storage area where they had freezers and different shelving for um, food stuff. It's kind of an interesting dive. I think this is a step up into the freezer, and there must have been cork insulation on the bottom of it. There's cork here separating that insulation. A pressure tank. I'm not sure if that was for fresh water or hot water or what it was really used for. Going back into another freezer here. The ladder there, I don't really remember what that ladder's for. There's a fan. Another fan. Thermostat kind of to the side. And it looks like we're headed back out already. Corey unhooking our safety lines so we would get caught down there. These shots are a comparison of the crack close to the prop of the ship, what seems to many to be an indicator of how much the ship is tearing itself apart. The bow of the ship is at 3 to 5 feet below the surface, and the crack is at 85 foot, so most of the weight of the hull is on the crack. Each year the crack gets a little longer and wider. Also, this crinkle seems to change each year. Seems to crinkle just a little bit more. All kinds of artifacts that a lot of us have never seen before seem to have shown themselves after the top has come off. These are some of them. Light fixtures. There's 2 or 3 of them, I think. There's a float that some tank had, I don't think it was a bathroom tank. It must have been something for in this kitchen to store water in. And there's a float that I think probably belonged to it. Cream still set on the shelf, not at all looking like it's 85 years old. Broken dishes laying in the debris. Table linen still looking white. A water tap that has been setting on something that rubbed a large hole in it. Another light. Yes, this is a sprinkler head. The America was fire sprinklered throughout the ship back in 1898. And it looks like we're headed for the surface again. Every year there are hundreds of people that take a look at the top 15 to 20 feet of America from the ferry boat that runs to Isle Royale from Grand Portage, Minnesota. You can see the winch, and the anchor tubes. You can actually see quite a lot of the boat right from the surface, the first 15 to 20 feet. Remember, though, it's 85 foot, and there's a lot of stuff that's below that too. If you're lucky and the wind stops blowing, you can get an evening like this where it's just fun to be on the water. On this one, we enjoyed a leisure boat trip to see the Rock of Ages lighthouse, about 10 miles southwest of Isle Royale. There were 3 ships lost on this shoal by the lighthouse. They are the Henry Chisholm, the Cumberland, and the George M. Cox. Nice sun in the background. Each year we usually see at least one moose, either feeding in the marsh by Washington Harbor or swimming from one island to another. And that's the end.